Sir, I can't help but notice you're shooting. What a remarkable skill. May I ask where you learned to shoot like
A little
that?
here, a little there,
Just a quiet old man at the shooting range, until the SEAL recruit spotted his tattoo. When 72-year-old Martin Hayes shuffled into the shooting range in his worn flannel shirt and faded jeans, the young Navy SEAL recruits barely gave him a second glance. But when Petty Officer Jared Martinez spotted the faded tattoo on the old man's forearm, everything changed, and a legend was revealed. The Precision Point shooting range in Virginia Beach buzzed with the controlled chaos of military training, where the sharp crack of gunfire mixed with the metallic clang of shell casings hitting concrete floors. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the indoor facility, while the acrid smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the recycled air. This wasn't a civilian hobby range. It was a serious training facility frequented by active-duty military personnel, law enforcement officers, and elite special forces candidates who came to hone their marksmanship skills on state-of-the-art equipment and challenging target courses. Martin Hayes looked like any other retiree as he signed in at the front desk, his weathered hands moving slowly across the paperwork while younger shooters in tactical gear bustled around him. At 72, Martin's gray hair was thinning his shoulders, slightly stooped, and his clothes, a red flannel shirt, well-worn Levi's, and scuffed work boots, suggested a man who had spent his career in manual labor rather than military service. The range staff knew Martin as a regular customer who came in twice a week, always polite, always quiet, and always shooting alone at lane 15 in the far corner. He brought his own equipment in a battered canvas bag, a vintage M1911 pistol that looked like it had seen better days, and a small collection of ammunition that he purchased in modest quantities. To the young Navy SEAL candidates who dominated the range during afternoon training sessions, Martin was invisible, just another old-timer trying to relive his youth with a gun he probably couldn't handle properly. They were focused on their own intensive training regimens, preparing for some of the most demanding military selection processes in the world, and had little time or interest in watching an elderly civilian plink at paper targets. What none of them realized was that Martin Hayes carried secrets that would have commanded their immediate respect and attention. Beneath his unremarkable exterior lay the experiences of a man who had served in some of the most classified and dangerous military operations of the Vietnam era, whose skills with firearms had been honed not on training ranges, but in life or death situations where a single missed shot could mean the difference between completing a mission and never coming home. Today, that carefully maintained anonymity was about to be shattered by the observant eyes of a young warrior who understood the significance of certain symbols. Petty Officer Jared Martinez was having a frustrating afternoon at the range. Despite months of intensive SEAL training, his groupings at 25 yards were inconsistent, and his instructor had made it clear that improvement was necessary if he wanted to continue in the program. As he reloaded his service pistol for another round of precision shooting movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. The old man in lane 15 was methodically preparing his equipment with movements that seemed oddly familiar to Jared. There was something about the way Martin handled his weapon, the economy of motion, the unconscious muscle memory, the professional efficiency. That didn't match his civilian appearance. Jared found himself watching as Martin assumed his shooting stance. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable to someone trained to observe tactical behavior. The old man's posture shifted from that of an elderly retiree to something that suggested years of professional firearms training. His grip, his stance, his breathing pattern, everything indicated someone with serious military experience. When Martin began firing, Jared's attention was completely captured. The shots came in controlled pairs, each one precisely placed in the center of the target at distances that challenged even experienced marksmen. This wasn't recreational shooting. This was the work of someone who had been trained to kill efficiently and accurately. During a break in his own training, Jared made a decision that would change both their lives. Instead of returning to his lane, he approached Martin's position with the respectful caution that one warrior shows another. "Excuse me, sir," Jared said, standing at a respectful distance. "I couldn't help but notice your shooting. That's some impressive marksmanship." Martin looked up from cleaning his pistol, his pale blue eyes assessing the young SEAL candidate with the same careful attention he had once used to evaluate potential threats in hostile territory. "Thank you, son. You're not doing too badly yourself." "I'm Petty Officer Martinez, Navy SEAL Training," Jared introduced himself. "Mind if I ask where you learned to shoot like that?" Martin's response was characteristically modest. "Here and there. Picked it up over the years." But as Martin reached for his ammunition box, Jared caught sight of something that made his breath catch. On Martin's left forearm, partially hidden by his flannel sleeve, was a faded tattoo that Jared recognized from military history books and veteran stories. It was the distinctive insignia of Marine Force Reconnaissance, one of the most elite and secretive units in the U.S. military. "Sir," Jared said quietly, his voice carrying a new level of respect, "is that a Force Recon tattoo?" Martin's hand instinctively moved to cover the faded ink, a gesture that had become automatic over the decades. For a moment, his carefully maintained civilian facade flickered, revealing glimpses of the warrior he had once been. "That's a long time ago, son. Different life, different world." But Jared wasn't deterred. His SEAL training had taught him to recognize the signs of elite military service, and everything about Martin, from his shooting technique to his tactical awareness to the way he carried himself when he thought no one was watching, screamed special operations. "Sir, with respect, Force Recon doesn't just fade away. Once a Marine, always a Marine. And Force Recon, that's legendary stuff." Martin studied the young man's face, seeing in Jared's eyes the same intensity and dedication that he remembered from his own youth. After decades of anonymity, of being just another old man in a world that had moved on from his war, Martin found himself facing someone who understood what that faded tattoo represented. "What do you want to know?" Martin asked quietly, making a decision that would bridge the gap between two generations of warriors. The conversation that followed transformed the atmosphere at precision point shooting range. As word spread among the SEAL candidates that the quiet old man in Lane 15 was a Force Recon veteran, the dynamic shifted dramatically. Young warriors who had been focused solely on their own training began glancing toward Martin's position with newfound curiosity and respect. Martin, initially reluctant to discuss his service, found himself gradually opening up under Jared's respectful questioning. "Vietnam, 1968 to 1970, he admitted. 3 tours with First Force Reconnaissance Company. We did things that didn't officially happen in places that weren't supposed to exist." The weight of those words wasn't lost on Jared, who understood that Force Recon had been involved in some of the most dangerous and classified operations of the Vietnam War. These were the Marines who had conducted deep reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence, and eliminating high-value targets with surgical precision. The tattoo? Martin continued rolling up his sleeve to reveal the full design. I got it after my second tour. Seemed important at the time to mark what we'd been through together. The faded ink showed a skull wearing a Marine cover surrounded by the motto, "Swift, Silent, Deadly," the unofficial creed of Force Reconnaissance units. As Martin's story emerged, other shooters at the range began to take notice. Staff Sergeant Williams, a Marine instructor working with the SEAL candidates, approached with obvious interest when he overheard fragments of the conversation. "Sir, did I hear correctly that you served with Force Recon?" Williams asked, his tone carrying the respect that one Marine shows another. Martin nodded, uncomfortable with the growing attention, but unable to deny his service when directly asked by a fellow Marine. "First Force Recon Company out of Camp Pendleton. We operated primarily in the northern provinces." Williams' eyes widened. "Sir, that unit has legendary status in Marine Corps history. The operations you guys conducted, some of that stuff is still classified." Word continued to spread through the range, and soon Martin found himself surrounded by a small group of young warriors eager to learn from someone who had operated at the highest levels of military special operations. The contrast was striking. These fit intense young men in their tactical gear, hanging on every word from an elderly man in flannel who looked like he should be fishing rather than discussing classified military operations. "I don't usually talk about this stuff," Martin admitted to the growing audience. "Most people wouldn't understand, and those who would, well, most of them didn't make it home." The breakthrough moment came when one of the SEAL candidates, Petty Officer Thompson, asked Martin about the mental aspects of precision shooting under pressure. "Sir, how do you maintain accuracy when everything's going to hell around you?" Martin was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he accessed memories that had been carefully locked away for decades. "Son, the shooting is the easy part. Any Marine can learn to put rounds on target. The hard part is making the decision to pull the trigger when you know that shot is going to change everything." He paused, looking at the young faces surrounding him. "In Force Recon, we didn't just shoot at targets. We shot at people. People who had families, people who thought they were fighting for something important. The technical skill is nothing compared to living with those decisions for the next 50 years. The range had grown quiet around them, even the instructors stopping their activities to listen to Martin's words. This wasn't just military history. This was wisdom earned through experiences that few people could imagine. "Every shot matters," Martin continued, "not just because of the mission, but because of what it does to you. You carry every one of them for the rest of your life." As the afternoon progressed, Martin found himself in an unexpected role. Informal instructor to some of the most elite military candidates in the country. The SEAL trainees, initially skeptical of advice from a civilian, now hung on his every word as he shared insights that couldn't be found in any training manual. "Show me your stance," Martin said to Jared, who had been struggling with his accuracy. As Jared assumed his shooting position, Martin made subtle adjustments, a slight shift in foot placement, a minor change in grip pressure, a different breathing rhythm. "Now try it," Martin instructed. Jared's next group was significantly tighter, his shots clustering in the center of the target with a precision that had eluded him for weeks. "How did you know to make those adjustments?" "Experience," Martin replied simply. "I've seen a lot of shooters over the years. You learn to read the small things that make the difference between hitting and missing." But Martin's real challenge wasn't teaching marksmanship techniques. It was deciding how much of his story to share with these young warriors who reminded him so much of the Marines he had served with decades earlier. The atmosphere at the range changed dramatically when Petty Officer Thompson made an offhand comment that struck Martin like a physical blow. "Sir, you must have some incredible war stories from Force Recon. I bet you guys were real heroes over there." Martin's face went pale, and his hands began to shake slightly as he set down his pistol. The word hero had triggered something deep and painful that he had spent decades trying to suppress. "Son," Martin said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone around him fall silent. "There weren't any heroes in the things we did, just Marines trying to survive and complete missions that nobody should have had to do." The young SEAL candidates exchanged glances, sensing that they had touched on something far more complex and painful than they had anticipated. Martin's demeanor had shifted from that of a patient instructor to something darker and more haunted. "You want to know about Force Recon?" Martin continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "We killed people in their sleep. We eliminated targets who never knew we were there. We gathered intelligence by methods that would make you sick. And we did it all in the name of protecting American lives and advancing American interests." The range had grown completely quiet, even the background noise of other shooters seeming to fade as Martin's words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. "Heroes don't carry the weight of those decisions for 50 years. Heroes don't wake up in cold sweats remembering faces of people they killed. Heroes don't spend their retirement trying to forget what they were capable of doing when their country asked them to." Jared, recognizing that Martin was experiencing something deeper than simple war memories, made a decision that demonstrated wisdom beyond his years. Instead of backing away or trying to change the subject, he moved closer to the older man. "Sir, with respect, maybe that's exactly what makes someone a hero," Jared said quietly. "Not the absence of doubt or guilt, but the willingness to carry that burden so others don't have to." Martin looked at the young SEAL candidate with eyes that had seen too much. "You don't understand, son. The things we did, some of them weren't about protecting anyone. Some of them were just about winning a war that couldn't be won." Staff Sergeant Williams, who had been listening from nearby, stepped forward. "Sir, I've studied Force Recon operations from Vietnam. I know about the cross-border missions, the targeted eliminations, the intelligence gathering. What you guys did saved thousands of American lives." "And cost thousands of others," Martin replied. "Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotian. People who were just trying to survive a war they didn't start." The moral complexity of Martin's experiences was something that none of the young warriors had fully considered. They had been trained to think in terms of missions accomplished and enemies defeated, not the long-term psychological cost of actions taken in the name of duty. Sir Thompson said hesitantly, "How do you live with that? How do you reconcile doing things you're not proud of in service of something you believe in?" Martin was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the shooting bench. "You don't reconcile it, son. You just carry it. And you try to make sure that the young Marines coming after you understand the real cost of what they're signing up for." The turning point came when Martin made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of retreating back into the anonymity he had maintained for decades, he chose to use this moment as a teaching opportunity for the young warriors surrounding him. "You want to know what Force Recon really taught me?" Martin asked, looking around at the faces of the SEAL candidates. "It taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. It taught me that the hardest battles aren't fought against the enemy. They're fought against yourself, against your own conscience, against the person you become when you do things that normal people should never have to do. He stood up slowly, his age showing in the careful way he moved. And it taught me that the real test of a warrior isn't what you do in combat. It's what you do with the rest of your life after you come home. Martin began packing his equipment, but his words continued to resonate through the range. Every one of you is going to face moments where you have to choose between what's easy and what's right, between following orders and following your conscience. The choices you make in those moments will define who you are for the rest of your lives. As Martin prepared to leave the range, the group of SEAL candidates and instructors found themselves reluctant to let him go. What had started as a casual conversation about marksmanship had evolved into something much more profound, a master class in the psychological realities of elite military service. Sir Jared said, "Would you be willing to come back? Maybe talk to more of the guys who are going through training?" Martin paused in packing his equipment, considering the request. For decades, he had avoided any connection to his military past, preferring the anonymity of civilian life to the complications that came with being recognized as a veteran of classified operations. "I don't know if that's a good idea, son. What I have to say isn't always what people want to hear about military service." Staff Sergeant Williams stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, that's exactly why they need to hear it. These candidates are being trained for operations that will put them in situations similar to what you faced. They need to understand not just the tactical aspects, but the human cost." Martin looked around at the young faces, seeing in them the same idealism and determination that he had carried into Vietnam 50 years earlier. Despite the respect and attention he was receiving, Martin struggled with doubts about sharing his experiences. The classified nature of many Force Recon operations meant that there were stories he could never tell, decisions he could never fully explain, and consequences that would remain buried in official files for decades to come. "You have to understand," Martin said to the group, "there are things I can't talk about, things that are still classified, things that would endanger people who are still alive, things that would compromise methods and sources that might still be in use." Jared nodded understandingly. "Sir, we're not asking for classified information. We're asking for wisdom, for insights into what it means to serve at the level you served at." Martin studied the young man's face, recognizing the sincerity in his request. "Wisdom," he repeated quietly. "I'm not sure I have much of that. Mostly, I just have regrets and questions that don't have good answers." The climactic moment came when Martin made a decision that would change his relationship with his past and his role in training the next generation of warriors. Instead of simply leaving the range and returning to his quiet retirement, he chose to stay and share one final story, the one that had haunted him for 50 years. "All right," Martin said, setting his equipment bag back down. "I'll tell you about the mission that ended my career with Force Recon. But I want you to understand that this isn't a war story. This isn't about heroism or glory. This is about the moment when I realized that some prices are too high to pay even in service of your country." The range fell completely silent as Martin began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of decades of suppressed memory and carefully guarded secrets. Cambodia, 1970. Officially, we were never there. Unofficially, we were hunting a North Vietnamese colonel who was coordinating supply routes through neutral territory. The mission was supposed to be simple, Martin continued. Locate, identify, eliminate. Clean and surgical. But intelligence was wrong about the target's location, and when we found him, he wasn't alone. Martin's hands began to shake slightly as he accessed memories that he had spent decades trying to forget. He was with his family, wife, 2 children, maybe 8 and 10 years old. They were having dinner when we breached the compound. The SEAL candidates listened in stunned silence, beginning to understand the moral complexity that Martin had been trying to convey. This wasn't the clean, heroic warfare depicted in movies and recruitment videos. This was the messy, morally ambiguous reality of special operations. The colonel went for his weapon. Standard response would have been to eliminate all potential threats in the room. That's what our training dictated. That's what the mission parameters called for. Martin paused, his eyes distant, as he relived the moment that had changed his life. I had a choice, Martin said quietly. Follow my training and eliminate all threats, or find another way. The colonel was armed, his wife was screaming, the children were terrified. In that moment, I had to decide what kind of Marine I was going to be. The tension in Martin's voice was palpable as he continued. I chose to wound rather than kill. Disabled the colonel, secured the family without harming them, got the intelligence we needed, and extracted without additional casualties. Jared leaned forward. Sir, that sounds like you made the right choice. Martin's laugh was bitter. The right choice. I was court-martialed for failure to follow mission parameters. Spent 6 months in military prison. Lost my security clearance, my career, my identity as a Marine. The official record shows that I was discharged for failure to adapt to military standards. The revelation hit the young warriors like a physical blow. Here was a man who had served with distinction in one of the most elite units in the military, who had been punished for showing mercy, for choosing humanity over mission parameters. But Sir Thompson said, you saved innocent lives. I did, Martin agreed, and I'd do it again. But the cost was everything I thought I was, everything I thought I believed in. I learned that sometimes doing the right thing means losing everything that matters to you. The climax of Martin's story came with his final words to the assembled warriors. Every one of you is going to face moments where you have to choose between following orders and following your conscience. The military will train you to follow orders without question, and most of the time, that's what keeps you and your teammates alive. He looked around at each face, making sure his words were understood. But there will come a time when you have to decide what kind of warrior you want to be, what kind of person you want to be. And in that moment, you'll have to live with whatever choice you make for the rest of your life. Martin picked up his equipment bag and headed toward the exit. The shooting techniques I showed you today will make you more accurate, but the choices you make about when and why to pull the trigger, those will make you who you are. As he reached the door, Martin turned back one final time. Semper Fi, Marines. Make sure you can live with the man you see in the mirror. Martin's story spread quickly through the SEAL training community and beyond. Within days, instructors were incorporating his insights into their curricula, using his experiences as case studies in military ethics and decision-making under pressure. The young warriors who had met him at the range found themselves changed by the encounter, approaching their training with a deeper understanding of the moral complexities they would face in their careers. Jared Martinez, in particular, was profoundly affected by Martin's story. He began visiting the older man regularly, not just to improve his marksmanship, but to continue learning from someone who had navigated the treacherous waters of elite military service and emerged with his humanity intact. The range staff at Precision Point designated Lane 15 as the Martin Hayes Memorial Lane, though Martin was very much alive. The name honored not his death, but the death of his military career in service of a higher principle. Word of Martin's story reached other veterans organizations, leading to invitations to speak at military academies and veteran support groups about the long-term psychological impacts of special operations service. 5 years later, Martin had become an unofficial mentor to dozens of special operations personnel, both active and retired. His small house in Virginia Beach became a gathering place for warriors struggling with the moral complexities of their service, seeking guidance from someone who had faced similar challenges. The Martin Hayes Doctrine, the principle that moral courage sometimes requires disobeying orders, became part of advanced military ethics training at several institutions. His story was studied not as an example of insubordination, but as a case study in maintaining humanity within the military structure. Martin never returned to active duty or regained his security clearance, but he found a new mission in helping others navigate the psychological challenges of elite military service. His influence extended far beyond the shooting range, where it all began, touching the lives of warriors who would carry his lessons into conflicts around the world. The faded Force Recon tattoo on his arm became a symbol not of past glory, but of ongoing service to those who served. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Martin sat in Lane 15 at Precision Point, methodically cleaning his old M1T111 while a new group of SEAL candidates trained nearby. One of them, a young woman named Petty Officer Rodriguez, approached hesitantly. "Sir, are you the Martin Hayes? The one who—" Martin looked up and smiled, seeing in her eyes the same mixture of idealism and determination that he remembered from his own youth. "Just an old Marine who learned some hard lessons, daughter. What can I teach you?" As Rodriguez settled in beside him, Martin began once again to share the wisdom earned through sacrifice, ensuring that the next generation of warriors would be better prepared for the choices that awaited them. True courage isn't measured by the enemies you defeat, but by the principles you refuse to compromise, even when the cost is everything you hold dear.